On this episode, we're going to talk about what do you do when you test the cable, it still works, but the computers aren't working. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, customers, and even IT personnel. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those couple little steps helps us take on that nasty algorithm, which helps us educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? I do a live stream on TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and eventually Instagram, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD questions about design, installation, certification, estimation, project management, even career path questions. But I can hear you now, Chuck, I'm driving my truck at Thursday nights at 6 p.m. I can't watch a video. I'll crash and then I'll lose my job. They're recorded, and you can access all of them at our website at letstalkcabling.com. Next, while this show is free, and it will always remain free, would you mind considering supporting this platform? By clicking on the QR code, you can buy me a cup of coffee. You can schedule 15 minutes with me offline after hours, of course. You can also go to Patreon, become a Patreon member. They get access to additional information. You can even become a corporate sponsor. All those steps helps us make this industry just a little bit better. As I mentioned in the intro, we're cable guys. We're good at pulling and terminating, testing, and cabling. But what do you do when a customer says that it's not working? You get out there, you test the cable certifier says, yeah, it's good. What's the next step? Do you just call the day and leave the customer hanging? Or do you try to do maybe some simple troubleshooting steps to help solve that customer's problems? What do you do when the IT guy is pointing at you and you're pointing at him? How do you resolve those issues? How do you talk about that with the customer? These are some questions that I've had to deal with in my career, and I know that some of you people have also dealt with it because I get it in questions. What did I do? You know me, I know a lot of cool people. And one of the people I know is Ed, the old tech guy. Ed, the old tech guy is very big on TikTok and some other social medias. And I came across me. I think he came in one of my live streams one night and we got talking. And I was so impressed. I was like, Ed, man, I got to get you on the show, dude. And guess what? He agreed. So welcome to the show, Ed, the old tech guy. Yeah, Ed, how you doing, my friend?
Thank you. I'll bow. By the way, everybody on the socials knows me as Ed, the old tech guy, but they know me for my intro, so I'll do it just so that I don't get 10 people saying, do the intro. So, hey, everybody, it's Ed, the old tech guy, and today we're going to talk cabling just for you. Yes, you. That's right. I do that quite a bit on the socials, and they love it. I don't know why. That's what I do.
It sounds like a radio broadcast kind of an thing.
Perhaps, but you wouldn't believe how many comments say, you didn't say it's Ed the old tech guy today. And I have quite a bit of other channels actually imitating it. They're like, hey, I'm going to do Ed the old tech guy. Hey, everybody, I'm Ed the old tech guy.
Yeah. It's like about a year ago or so, I started putting the tag in all my videos, knowledge is power. And I didn't really think anything about it. I just started saying it because I thought it was kind of cool. And I did a meetup in Miami. And the first guy got there for the meetup and he walks in. First he says, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. It's like, hey, I should make that into a shirt.
They remember that before your name, right? They'll be like, I can't remember your name, but knowledge is power, right? I'll bet you that's happened. I know it has.
I'm hoping to go to the Bixie conference here in February. My company, my day job is not sending me, so I may end up taking vacation time and paying for it myself. I just got to talk the wife into allowing me to do that because that's a chunk of change, right? And because I know last year, the podcast was only a year old, and I had probably 20 or 30 people come up to me, Chuck, love your podcast. And now, I mean, my podcast has grown so much over the last year, and I get people from all walks of life. I'm really curious to see the impact difference there, and I love going to the Bixie conference because you learn so much.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
absolutely.
Now, I have never been to a Bixie conference. I've heard you talk about it, and to
What?
be fair, yes, to be fair, I was impressed. I'm like, oh wow, that's so. I've gone to things like NANOG and other large conferences of that type that are in the WAN side of the business, but when it gets down to the cabling, some engineers that are on the WAN side and the IT side look at cabling as like any other construction medium unfairly. To be I need to say that because it's unfair to what structured cabling is. As
Yes.
somebody who came up through structured cabling,
Right.
right? I used to run RS-232, I used to run T1s, I used to run DS3s.
Right.
I
Right.
understand that. I understand what it takes. And as I moved up the ranks, I saw how that is not always, you know, thought of or given the respect that it should be given.
Right. There's a huge divide, right? There's those of us who pull cable or have pull cable, and then we got into the higher echelons of the career field. Like now we're socializing with engineers and stuff. And then there's the people who went to college and got their degrees and became engineers. And more than once, I had a guy one time. I was in a company meeting, and we were talking about contractors and installers. Again, remember, the first 3 decades of my experience is actually pulling, terminating, testing cable. And this guy made a comment. He referred to cable installers as knuckle draggers. Knuckle draggers. I was like, I looked at him and said, "You do realize I spent 3 decades as a knuckle dragger, right? And your fancy network isn't going to work until I get my cabling working right. I am the foundation that you are building on. So you really need and let's be honest, there are some cable guys out there that are kind of rough around the edges, right? I used to work with a splicer. The guy had a ponytail and had hair halfway down his back.
Hmm.
He looked like an old surfer dude, right? But I tell you what, that guy knew splicing inside out, forwards, backward. You could rattle off a number, 14,362. He could tell you what supergroup, what binding group, and what color pair it was off the top of his head.
I have seen many of the same people, and I'll be honest with you, they what a lot of people don't know is that when you reach that level and you're needed that much by that company, you're sometimes making as much, if not more, than some of the systems engineers that are
Oh
out
yeah,
there. And these guys are so important to the business. I could not do what I do today without guys being out there climbing towers, digging up trenches, running inside ISW, inside wiring cable, right? Those guys are so important to the business. And again, they're not given any credit or any thanks until it's 3 in the morning and we need to
right,
wake them up out of bed to go check the cable. And half the time we're wrong. It's not the cable.
right.
and, and, and unfortunately, that's why, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I wanted to say that's why I always make time to respect the craft. I came up
Yes.
through the craft. So, guys, if you ever run into that, if you ever run into an engineer, not giving you the proper due respect, because it will happen, unfortunately, smile, brush it off, kick the dust off your feet and walk to the next order or
Yep.
install. Because
Yep.
that guy is going to learn a heavy lesson one day when he needs you bad. And when he needs you, remind him, you weren't that nice to me, but I'm going to do this for you. You know why? Because my network's more important than the way you acted. I promise you, they'll have a different thought of you from then on.
I've been in this industry long enough that I can tell you right now, karma will come back around and get you.
Absolutely.
Right. So if somebody's like that once, like you just said, just take the high road. I know sometimes it's hard. Take the high road. But what'll happen is one day that guy will get, like you said, a hard lesson, and then they'll grow appreciation for you because everybody has different paths in their lives, and that doesn't make one person better than another. We just have
Yes.
all have different paths. Some of us, I remember when I was a young. We'll get to the questions here in a second. We're just chit chatting now. I remember when I was a young technician coming up through the ranks, and I was out there installing voice and data cables. You mentioned RS-232. I did that, and Twin X and Coax and Type 1 and Type 3 and all that fun stuff. And as I was progressing through my career and becoming a technician and then a project foreman and then a project manager, all the guys who were coming in around me, they're like, "Oh no, man, I don't want to do cable for the rest of my life. I want to be a network engineer." I'm like, I'm fine with being a cable guy. I love this stuff. I love this stuff, man. You know,
The,
to each
the
their own.
There is a beauty in it. I'm gonna plug him. I'm gonna plug him just because I've seen him on the socials. But All Green Lights, a
Oh
guy
yeah.
like that is so passionate that he's sitting there and loves the way he's done his cable. He's so proud of it,
Yes.
right? He's that kind of guy that stands up like this, like
Yep.
Superman, and says,
Yep.
check out my cabling. It's gorgeous. It's an artwork. And I came up from doing cabling when we used to have to do the Kansas City stitch, the Chicago stitch, using wax thread to
Yep.
do every power cable throughout the plant. And then when we did the DS3 cabling, the coax, that's that thin stuff, right? We had to lace that all in, right?
Yep.
Without breaking it, without extra cinching and breaking it. There's an art to all of that.
Yes.
Um, it is sorely missed because for some reason I was watching some of your shows, Chuck. I was watching them, and you had a guy that showed this cable plant that was just such a disgusting mess. It had probably about a billion cables. It looked like somebody's spaghetti,
Right.
and that is the kind of rooms I'm running into now because the art, the craft, is not being respected.
That too. And what happens is there was a lot of technicians who, like you, came up through the central office type of world where they grew up talking about cable dressing. I never spent time in a central office, but my mentors were people from the central office. So cable dressing was always the best. And you mentioned All Green Lights, Sean Rep, Low Volt Warby. There's a half a dozen low voltage guys on the internet. I mean, they are. I hate the term cable porn. I hate that term. I'd rather call them a closet artist because
Yes,
that's what it is. I mean,
yes,
there's symmetry. And here's the funny thing: customers equate quality visually. Yeah, they want to see the reports. Yes, they want to think work. But when they walk into the room, they don't want to see that nasty cable. Now, what will happen is that beautiful structured cable plant that you turn over to them 6 months later, a year later, it looks like a rat's nest because they're just running their patch cords everywhere, right?
right.
Yeah, that's just something we got to deal with, unfortunately. And actually, I just had a conversation when I was on Tech Talk with Steve from AEM Testing, and we actually talked about that. He had brought up a picture. I think I posted the video today on TikTok actually,
Mm.
where we brought up a picture. Said, "How would you fix this?" And a couple of people said, "Run, don't do it," because it is a lot of things. So we got kind of sidetracked there. But Ed, who are you? Why should our audience listen to you? What brings you credibility?
I've been in telecommunications for 30 years or so. And I started out right at the basics. I was wiring RS-232 with meat scales. So if many of you know supermarkets like Jules, Dominic's, and things of that nature, they were communicating their meat scales with RS-232 communication from scale to scale to scale, making a bridge network so that all the scales would tell them how much meat was coming in, how much meat was going out, and they can adjust accordingly for their records. And from there, I went to work for some of those big name telecommunications companies that you can imagine. And I first gained work as a telephone installer. So I worked in places like Cabrini Green here in Chicago that no longer exists, and worked with some of that inside plant wire. So I know quite a bit of that inside wiring piece of it. From there, I kept growing my career and went into microwave design and engineering, went into became a program manager and helped manage as a planner or program manager 800 cell towers and had to worry about the cabling there. I've got multiple certifications from my. Oh, here, you want me to look at them on LinkedIn? I've got multiple certifications from um, cabling for power cabling, structured cabling, and then I've got some certifications that are geared towards the WAN. So when you're talking about um, your Sienna certification, some Cisco certifications, some IT certifications, multiple certifications that way because I kept growing my career from the physical plant to now the virtual plant. And today I work as a solutions engineer for another very large telecommunications company that provides services not only to other telecommunications companies but to SMB customers. So I'm the fun guy you get to talk to when you are thinking about building a building and you want to set up or a data center and you want to set up your entrances for your telecommunication services, your WAN, and we get to talk a little bit about the inside plant and some of the Wi-Fi services that the company offers. But I also have, on top of that, I run at night. I don't turn into Batman. I don't put on a mask, guys. At night, I've been running a business where I do some IT consulting for now, wow, 25 years. I've been doing some IT consulting. And in that IT consulting, I do run quite a bit of wiring and cabling for my customers. So these customers are smaller customers that don't have everything they need at all times. And they need a person like myself or like you guys out there to give them a hand to set up their network. How do I what cables do I need? What equipment do I need? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do a lot of that, and I do it for a small amount of money, sometimes even doing it for free. And I've had a few people tell me, why would you do that for free, Ed? If you're out there and you want to get into the business, this is a great way to do it. And I hope I'm not ruining one of your questions there. But by donating your time to some of these businesses and donating your time to some groups like this, you actually get your own private uh, plant that you get to manage. You get your own lab that you get to experiment with, and you learn so much so fast on the business end. All of that equates to a well-rounded engineer and installer.
Yeah, you're the kind of engineer that I love to come across because you had the cable experience and you've got the knowledge on the stuff. And I'll link your LinkedIn profile in the description down below so people can go check out your profile. And I will say this before we get into the next question. You say you're not Batman, but I will say this. You and Batman have never been seen in the same room together.
Thank
And,
you. That's right. That's right.
and I see you got the Batman light behind you. So I'm thinking Ed might be Batman. I'm just saying. Just saying.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So let me ask you a question. So this show is really geared towards the cable guys, the cable dudes. They've never really done network engineering. They've never done installed hubs, router, server switches, stuff like that. They just been pulling cable, terminating cable, turning it over to the customer, right? So let me give you an example. Let me tell you some, then you can tell me some basic steps that you would go through. Let's say
Mhm.
a customer calls a guy or a technician, I shouldn't say guy, a technician, because there are female technicians, and calls him and says, "Look, your cable's not working." And you go out there and you hit it with the AEM Test Pro 100 or whatever certifier you have, and you test it, and cable tests fine. What are some simple steps that they can do to maybe on the hub router switch to maybe make sure that it's not stuff? Because I don't want to get into that whole the IT guy saying it's the cable guy's problem, the cable guy saying it's and then leaving the customer stuck, right? So what are some simple troubleshooting steps?
Well, I've run into this quite a bit, and I actually have to manage both the physical plant and the virtual plant. And since I install the wiring most of the time, I have to troubleshoot both those pieces and verify what's actually working, what's not working, so that I can get down to the issue and solution. The first thing I would do to make sure that my cable plant is clean is to reboot the device. That's the old adage. Keep it simple. I don't like saying stupid, so I'm going to say smarty. Keep it simple, smarty, and reboot your device. Start there. If that doesn't fix the problem, then it comes down to some basic steps on your OSI model. Stay on the physical, okay? And when you're staying on the physical, when you tell some of these IT administrators and even engineers that are out here, when it comes to networking and design engineers, and you tell them, I'm going to look for CRC errors on my service, they're like, CRC errors? This isn't TDM. Those are things that they don't understand sometimes. CRC errors come before framing that is placed on Ethernet. So look for CRC errors, look for signal loss, look for your impedance testing. Now, I'm bringing these things up, but you should have done that when you first installed your cable, provided what I call a birth certificate, and you should have your original number. So you do a stair and stair compare. Now, let's say you didn't do that. And let's say it's just the device that's the issue, and you have no way to prove it because you're walking into a new plant that you didn't certify yourself. have the engineer loop to his own equipment and test through there and see if the issues happen. If he's got a spare, stick a spare on there. This may not always happen. This may not always be possible. Maybe they're in a warehouse, it's 10,000 feet high. But things like this to keep in mind do help. Another thing is to always ask them if they've got the latest firmware on their device. If they can tell you that their firmware is, 5 years old, there may be an issue there. He hasn't pushed the latest firmware, so guess what? He doesn't even know if his device is working well at the most primal levels of that device. Um, One of the things that I like to do is also, this gets a little techie, but you can get a Raspberry Pi and set up and this mimics much of your testing equipment, but guys like myself, IT administrators and others do like to see this type of testing because they trust it more than your testers. Don't ask me why, but they do. And I know because I've seen it. Get yourself a Raspberry Pi, stick a virtual instance on there, and do open networking. I think that's an app that you can download to a Linux server, and you can actually run a signal across it and back, and it's going to tell you the speed of the cable that it was able to accomplish. It's going to let you know if there's any latency, any jitter, things of that nature. Um, when you're troubleshooting switches, things of that nature, you know, lights, the actual lights in the front of the device, they tell you so much. Don't ignore those lights. Those lights just blink and they're almost hypnotizing, but those lights will tell you very basic things that are going on with the system. Also, the type of issue the customer is having with the device is extremely important. If he has errors that are in and out errors, right? Things that, oh, my device, can do this or can't do this or can do this or can't do that. Those type of errors are easily solved by providing a longer term test by and showing, look, my cable is able to sustain this test for this amount of time. Push video, push media, do something of that nature, something that they understand. I've done 8K, 4K video across a cable and say, look, I'm pushing it from one device to another. How can you tell me that this cable that I ran to 280 feet and I now pushed it is sustaining this level of video without packet loss?
Absolutely. So, a couple comments on that.
Mhm.
Number one, if you go reboot a piece of equipment for to maybe reset the code, I always was told it was a microcode. I don't know if that's a true thing or not, but they say to always reboot. And I've had that with my computers. Before you reboot any piece of equipment, talk to the customer first. Let them know you're doing that, because that issue might be isolated to just that one port you're trying to work, and there's 23 other people on that. If you flip it off, 23 people are going to start screaming, "What happened to my network?" Give the IT person, be proactive, let them know, hey, I got to do this. Can we just notify everybody? It should be quick. I don't know. It takes what, a minute or two to reboot something, right? It won't be down long, but there you go. And the second thing I want to talk about is, if you don't have a Raspberry Pi, will an apple pie work? Because I don't like raspberries.
I don't know if there's such thing as an apple pie, but an Apple device may work if you're able to get the right USB connector to Ethernet connector, or if it's fiber, you can get some fiber connectors, some SC to SC or LC to LC
Right.
connectors to push across it. The point being that you pretty much prove your cabling out to that. And I'll be honest with you, as I've done more and more work on the virtual side, barring any fiber cut, cabling is usually the last thing
Right.
that is the issue. Don't allow the customer to take you, oh, I know what I'm going to do. Let me start troubleshooting from the application layer 7, all the way up on the stack. No, 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 Mr. Customer. Let's stay on layer 1. Let's look for signal loss. Let's look for this.
Right.
And if they don't understand that, tell them to look for jitter. Tell them to look for, CRC errors and things of that nature. Asking them to pull up a report from their device as to what the issues have been, God, that is gold. That is
Right.
gold, because you'll be able to say, well, those issues are higher in the stack than on cabling.
Right. Yeah, if you don't have a good foundation, the stuff above it ain't going to make a difference until you get that foundation solid. Now, I was
Mhm.
kind of half joking about the pie thing, but What is a Raspberry Pi? How much does it cost? And where can they get one?
Ah, great question. So a Raspberry Pi is a single board computer that was designed for school kids in I believe in Europe. Catch me if I'm wrong in the comments, guys. But it was designed so that school kids can learn how to start programming and do code and learn Linux. And it sells. It originally sold for $35. It now sells for 45. Very inexpensive. You get, after you get the housing and some other things, you can get it for about $100 altogether. It is extremely awesome. Imagine the computing power of a small notebook in a single board computer where you don't need anything but power. You don't need a screen. You don't need anything. You power it up. You've already got the initial code for it to boot up by itself. It's not like Windows where you got to put your login or anything. And once it's booted up, you go to the other end to a computer and you log in through the IP address.
So is it something you got to build, or can you buy a Raspberry Pi already ready to roll?
You can buy a Raspberry Pi through eBay. There's a lot of people that will be happy to pre-configure it, have everything ready for you, and say, what is the purpose of your Raspberry Pi? Oh, it's for network testing. I gotcha. I'll load the operating system on it or the OS. I'll load in the application for you, and it'll be ready to go. Here's the typical IP address that it'll always land on. Maybe it's like 10.10.10.33, or usually they'll give you a 192 address, and then you just order it, get it home, and you're good to go. But I know that sometimes gets a little funky for some installers because it, they don't want to be dealing with computers and screens and things of that nature, right? So you go back to your Fluke where you can actually see the things that you're testing, and I know that you're more comfortable with that. But I promise you that when you go a little bit up the stack, just a little bit, you venture there, your IT administrator, your network engineer is going to go, oh, oh, I guess it is my problem.
Yeah, yeah. So if it costs $45 to buy the parts to build your own, what's it cost to buy ballparkish? Buy one that's already set up for you.
I'd say about 100 to $130 or something like that
Okay,
on eBay. There's tons of guys out there doing it.
gotcha. My next question, you all in that last in your response, you said the birth certificate. Can you dive in on what you mean by birth certificate?
Sure. So when I do certain cabling, and I do this at in the evenings again in my Batman job, I provide a report on the actual cable that I ran if the customer pays for it. And Chuck and I will get into that portion of the discussion in just a moment. If the customer pays for the extra adage, I go ahead and provide what's called a birth certificate. And that birth certificate, I've got things like signal loss, any CRC errors. I'll even check for jitter, frame loss, things of that nature on that cable. But I get down to the dB level, right? So I want to see, like, depending on the length of the cable, I want to see 20 dB across my Cat 6 cable at 100 ohms for the impedance. Things of that nature is a complete report that I print out and have for myself on the specific cable that I'm running, especially if it's a trunk. So I use this as an upsell for the customer. And the reason why I use it as an upsell is because some of the customers that I'm dealing with at night and are customers that really aren't data centers. They're small to medium business customers that don't always have the money to invest for the time. So if I'm donating my time and if I'm doing this at a very cheap level, sometimes I'm just running the cable. I trust what I've done and I'm able to deploy from there. Remember, I'm in charge of not only the physical plant, but the virtual plant. So once I have my equipment up and running, I could do some of that testing. I could process some data across it. But if you're doing this professionally, and if I sub you out, I want a birth certificate for every single cable. If you're not giving me that, you're not getting paid.
So you and I talked about this before we actually started the show.
Yes.
My feeling is if you're in this industry as a professional, you should be certifying every cable run you do. If you got a project that's only got two cables, you certify them. If you got a cable that's a project that's got 1 million cables, you certify them, whether or not the customer's paying you to do it. Okay. Because nothing else, it gives you peace of mind. It gives you some historical data that you can refer to. Say, look, well, okay, on this date, this cable did this, but now tested today, it's got that. What happened in between? Oh, well, the electricians came out and put in some new. Ah, there you go. We can have a conversation on, but Chuck, they're not paying me. Okay. We can have a conversation on selling those results to the customer. But as a professional, it's my opinion, again, just my opinion, and the opinion of many in our industry, you should be certifying every single cable you do. A simple verification test, it's only going to tell you you've got reversals or transposals or opens or shorts. It doesn't tell you the signal to noise ratio. It doesn't tell you if you have crosstalk. It doesn't tell you if there's water or if you use too much pulling lubricant and it's causing insertion loss. A simple verifier will not do that. It's not the complete picture. That's like, I have a 2006 F350 Power Stroke crew cab, 8-foot bed. Yeah. Takes 2 zip codes to turn that truck around. And I am not one of them guys who lives in the city who's got a big truck. Because look at me, I have a farm. I have to have the truck. It has to run. I have to go pick up mulch and manure and all kinds of fun stuff. So I just took it. I just got out of the shop this morning. It was throwing in air, right? And let's just say I only looked up that code. It was I'm trying to think what the code. It was a TBC fault. If I just looked on the internet and looked up TBC fault, that might not be the real resolution to the problem. But the guy who I trust in my truck, he logged in with his scanner, with his tool. It gave him the exact error code. Just the problem is with the wiring harness, and he's ordered a new wiring harness. That's kind of the detail that you need when you're installing structured cabling, right? And you should be doing that as a professional. And I can hear somebody, Chuck, I don't want to spend $26,000 on a tester. Dude, I got you. There are testers cheaper than that gold tester. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that gold tester, but there are other test manufacturers out there. I won't mention any names, one right behind me, that can do the same thing as them more at a better price. So you don't have to go out and buy the best of the best of the best. There are plenty of good stuff out there that'll get you to do that. So we talked about the network electronics. Let's shift our conversation to WAPS, wireless access points. Those things that need cabling. I don't need cable. I got a wireless access point.
They're not completely wireless. What are you talking about?
What?
You can't just buy them. You can't just buy them and stick them on the wall.
Yeah, who knew? That's another question I get quite often, actually. Why do I have to run wire to my wireless access point? It's wireless. Yeah, no, that's not that. We can have a whole show just about that conversation, right? Let's say a wireless access point's not working. Again, looking from the view of a cable installer or technician, what are some simple things they can do to make sure that WAP is, or simple troubleshooting tips for the WAP?
So when it comes to your wireless access point or your WAP, and I'm going to include some of the router and the switching in this because they go hand in hand. One of the main things to troubleshoot for is a lot of systems engineers, IT engineers, they sometimes over provision their equipment. Let's be honest. And this is hard for a cabling person to understand because they're not really up the stack. So what I mean by that is they will go ahead and put things like deep packet inspection in a router that is rated for 100 meg or 100 gig or whatever speed it's rated for. Once they put DPI, deep packet inspection, or other types of stacked services on that switch or router, what happens is that the processor and RAM is taxed and they can't really gain the speeds that they thought they were going to get, that it said in the box. This router and switch is rated for 1 gig. All right, cool. So my WAN's going to come in at 1 gig and I'll be able to broadcast at 1 gig. Are you sure? Because once you add those things, you can't really do that because you're taxing those. Now that goes down in line with your WAP, because sometimes when you're troubleshooting the WAP or the wireless access point, the first problem I always get is, Ed, this wireless access point said I would be able to do 600 meg, 500 meg, a gig, 10 gig communication between the user, between this many feet to the WAP. What's going on? How come that's not happening? It must be the cable. No, the cable is actually transmitting exactly what is uh, going in and going out perfectly. It's the end devices that are the issue. So make sure that your IT or systems engineer it hasn't over provisioned the device. Ask them, what is your device rated for? And after you add all those things on the stack, can it actually do what you're thinking it's going to do? That's one. The second thing I always get is that when it comes to WAPS, people don't double check their frequencies, right? So you should know there are applications that you could get for um, the spectrum analyzers that you can get on your phone. So you're a cable guy, you really don't want to troubleshoot a wireless access point. But if they have something like, let's say, Ubiquity, which is what a small customer would have, or Cisco, the Cisco devices that they have out there, Meraki, right? They have applications that exist for Android and Apple that you could put on your phone. Specifically, Ubiquity has, I think, Wi-Fi Man, where you can actually see the Wi-Fi broadcast and see how strong it is, where it is. So dead spots are not your fault, cabling person, because it's not fair to blame you for that. The next thing you want to look for is lights, the light configuration. If they've turned off the lights on the access point, tell them to put them back on, because sometimes they're blinking, and that blink will tell you a lot of information. Firmware report on the WAP. Tell them to log into it. If they can't log into it, there's a problem. If they can log into it, tell them to give you a report. Let's study the report. I want to see what's going on. What is it receiving? What is the receive signal from the Cat6 cable fiber to media change to Cat5, right? But what is the signal that's coming in? All that gives you tons of information.
Make sure you tune in next week for part 2 of this fascinating series with Ed, the old tech guy.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.